And here's the thing. Keir Starmer says as a matter of absolute priority what he will do should he be elected to government is he will lower the voting age to 16 and 17. And the question for you is this. Do you think that's a good idea? Do you think it's absolutely right? Why shouldn't 16-year-olds vote? After all, they can join the army, they can have sexual intercourse, they can get married, they can do all sorts of stuff. That's very responsible indeed. So why shouldn't they be able to vote? Or do you think this is just a cynical ploy to extend Labour's power base? Because after all, when you're young, I remember my parents saying to me they were absolutely appalled that I hadn't gone through a communist phase. They thought it was absolutely de rigueur, part of growing up. Vanessa, when are you going to go through your communist phase? And I was just so busy just, putting posters of David Cassidy and Donny Osmond on my wall and experimenting with eye makeup. I didn't even think about communist phases, and they were disparaging about me because I didn't. In other words, what I'm leading up to is we imagine that most young people will vote Labour if they're going to bother voting at all, and we think maybe that's what Keir Starmer has in mind. Let's talk about this to Darren Hughes. Darren's Chief Executive of the Electoral Reform Society and a former member of the New Zealand Parliament. Hi, Darren.
Hi there, Vanessa.
And so is this a wise, smart and excellent move by Keir Starmer? Should he become Prime Minister? Just extend your power base day one, hour one. OK, you're 16 and on your birthday you can start voting. Terrific.
Well, we've been campaigning for a long time for including 16 and 17-year-olds in the vote, to expand the franchise, to bring more people into democracy. And there's a health of democracy argument to that. But there's also a side of it which is about some of the inequality that exists now, because if you're a 16 or 17-year-old in Scotland or Wales, you can vote. So extending that to England and Great Britain and looking at Northern Ireland for UK, that seems the next sensible step. I think this argument about which party might it favour at the next election, etc., I think that's kind of, I always find that kind of thing quite unhelpful, because you should write rules for elections that can stand the test of time for 20, 30, 40 elections, rather than trying to get into what might happen next time. I think that we went kind of down that road with voter ID, and I think we should bring it back to principles rather than who's going to benefit from it at the next election.
Right. Well, what is the principle here, would you say?
Well, I think the principle is that if we matched it with citizenship education in schools, and we got people thinking about what it means to be a citizen, what your rights are, what your responsibilities are, how to frame a question, how to listen carefully to an answer, how to work out, who might be leading you on rather than who's telling you the truth, etc. Those are all good, adult citizen skills to have.
I wouldn't mind a class in all of those. I don't know if I'm certainly not 16 or 17, but I doubt very much that I can see through all the obfuscation. I doubt very much I can always see who is sincere and who is not, who is trying to manipulate me and who is not, who is covering something up and who is not. How am I supposed to do that when I'm 16?
Well, I think that's why it comes back to not just doing it as some sort of gimmick to say, well, you get a ballot paper on this day because you're 16 or 17. If we integrate it with civic education about how to be a citizen, then because most 16 and 17-year-olds are still in the school system, then you can actually begin to bring that through, and you can have quite neutral information about what parties stand for, and then leave it to people to examine and explore that. I think the examples that we've had from Scotland and Wales bear that out. And then more broadly, away from the British Isles, what's clear from people who have countries that have done this is that if people vote in their very first election, and that's regardless of what the age is, they're more likely to become lifetime voters and not miss subsequent elections. And we've got a big problem in the UK with millions of people who don't get on the electoral register, and then of those who do, only about 2/3 turn out to vote. Partly that's because not every vote counts equally around the place, and that's another discussion. But we've got to try and improve the health of democracy. I think that's what the key thing is. So I think this is a very positive development, and if it leads to a generation and then the next generation and the next generation who are participating more as active citizens, people will look back on that and be a good thing. And my own personal prediction would be that they'll vote all over the place in the years to come. I think it's a little cartoonish to think they'll all vote one way.
I wonder, though, obviously it's a generalisation, obviously it's a cliche, and obviously it is sweeping everyone into one giant category rather than taking people as individuals. However, Is it not the case that young people are much more likely to be left-wing, and as life, rubs the rough edges off them, and as they might, if they're very, very lucky, or indeed have inherited some money after inheritance tax, may climb onto the property ladder, may become pillars of the community, they're likely to shift somewhat to the right? Isn't that in general the pattern, or do you think it's unfair and unwise to generalise about these things?
Well, I think it's unwise to freeze it for all time to say that a certain group of people will always vote the same way. That exact argument, by the way, was used by opponents of extending the franchise to women.
Yes, I know. I'm aware.
Because they say, they'll all vote one way, and then look at where women tend to vote today. It's different to what was said back in the day, and that's my point about let's rise above the 2024 general election and think about what we want. I also think there are two different issues there. One is about who should vote and what the rights and the privileges and the principles are behind that. And then there's a second question about, well, how do they vote? But I think we should avoid trying to say we'll make our decision on who should vote based on how they might vote. That seems to me to be not a very good way to go about it. Let's make it a positive thing. Train up young people about being good citizens, rights and responsibilities, participate in democracy, ask tough questions. And we saw in Scotland when they were included in the referendum debate back in the day, 10 years ago, people made all sorts of assumptions, and the Scottish Conservatives say they were some of the hardest questions they got were from well-informed 16 and 17-year-olds, and that's why north of the border, the Scottish Conservatives support votes at 16. So I think this will be looked back on as a positive development if it happens, and we're all for it.
And talk to me just a little about the idea, the notion, I think it's already up and running and has been for some time in Australia. If I'm wrong, you can correct me, of course, but the notion that you must vote because being part of a democracy is a vast privilege, not something that you should squander or ignore, and you shouldn't be fatalistic and just assume that your vote doesn't matter or that things always remain the same, whatever you do or don't vote. So you've got to be made to vote, pressured to vote, and effectively fined if you don't do it. Is there any likelihood at all that sort of pressure might be brought to bear here?
I don't think so, although it does come up quite a lot when I'm out on our research and campaign program. People ask about it. It is compulsory to vote in Australia. Proponents of that in Australia would say the advantage is it brings the two major parties closer to the centre where more people are because they've got they know that everyone will vote. Another perspective is to say, well, why should you force people to vote? Because if politics has been conducted so badly that people don't want to participate, why would you reward the very people who have created that environment by guaranteeing them a market? So there are other reforms we could do to try and improve candidate selection, improve public policy, get better campaigns going and motivate people to vote positively rather than saying it's compulsory and if you don't vote, there's a fine to be paid. Well, I do know in Australia some people can collect their ballot paper and write on the Jedi Party. So it might be a good recruitment for Star Wars, I'm not sure.
And the idea that Keir Starmer is instantly, he walks up the stairs at number 10, he has a look at the bedroom, he says which side of the bed he wants to sleep on, and then immediately extends the age of voters and allows 16 and 17-year-olds to have the vote. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, it's a strange priority, isn't it? When you're telling everyone that the country is an absolute crisis, economic crisis and everything else, and then you say, well, actually, our priority is to give the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds. Well, it doesn't quite consistent with all their what else they're saying, what needs to be done. Of course, as you say, 16, 17-year-olds are more likely to vote Labour. So, it's pretty straightforward gerrymandering. But although, the Conservatives are not that above that either, are they? Let's face it, why did they change the voting system in the London mayoral election to first past the post? Because you thought that would benefit them, although it didn't help them win it. But I think, if you're going to reduce it to 16, 17-year-olds, why not go further? Why not 12-year-olds? Why not 9-year-olds? But of course, the reason Labour would want to stop at 16 is because, the sort of what research has been done on this suggests that when you get to sort of younger children, they tend to vote more like their parents. So, which might be a little more likely to be conservative. So, Yeah, it's it's trying to establish themselves electoral advantage, isn't it? That's
Do you think at 16 you have reached the age of political awareness and cognizance? You're somebody whose political opinions really do need to be registered. You're capable of working out which party you prefer or which you least abhor, the least worst or the best or whatever it is. Do you think at 16 you are capable of this, or do you think you are too young and really have had so little life experience that you don't yet deserve to have a crucial part in the enacting of democracy? You should wait a bit, because we hear already in Scotland and in Wales, 16-year-olds are busy voting, aren't they?
Well, I mean, personally, I would have voted with enthusiasm at the age of 16, but then I'd also voted with enthusiasm at the age of 8, because being a bit of a political nerd, I was interested in elections and voting and things from that
All right,
age.
well, here's the
Because when
crucial
the
question.
clangers
Let me
had a
ask the
general
key
election.
question then. Would you vote with enthusiasm now? I want to know if you've become more, let's say, more browned off, more disillusioned, more wounded by life, less enthusiastic than you would have been at 8 or 16. Maybe you can't be bothered this time around, Ross.
No, I shall be voting. I will always vote, but I would be absolutely dead against the suggestion you were talking about a few moments ago about making voting compulsory. I mean, the idea that we shall be marched down to the polling station and fined if we refuse to express a preference, I think it is just quite sort of horrible and dictatorial. And I'm surprised that sort of Australia do it, but then, as we found out during COVID, Australia can have a strange sort of authoritarian streak to it at times.
Tell me
So,
what you would say to contemporaries of yours who say, Ross, honestly, I really can't bear to trudge down to the polling station. On July, I'm going to be on my holiday, and I'm sure all your friends are in Benidorm or Magaluf, absolutely living it up, Ross. So, I'm going to be on my summer holiday. I can't be bothered to do a postal vote. I don't care about it anyway. I'm old enough to see that nothing ever changes. Everything is the same under the sun. They'll be blithering incompetents, as they always are. They'll say there'll be more bobbies on the beat, and there won't be. They'll say they're going to build housing on TfL or different transport land all over the country, and they won't do it. All the things they say they'll do, they won't do. They're destined for absolute doom, as everybody always is. The poor will remain poor, the sick will get sicker. Can't be bothered to vote this time. Ross, what would you say to them?
I think if you can't be bothered to vote, well, fine, but then don't moan when the next government does something you disagree with. As you said, I mean, you've expressed a sort of it's a quite common sort of cynical
I
attitude
know, that's why
towards
I'm saying it.
politics. But
Yeah.
yeah, but ultimately the public do tend to get what they want, and if you took the sort of policies, taxation, or on anything really. I mean, the policies we have are there because that is by and large what the people want. There are a few issues where that there is a schism between the political class and the people, such as on the death penalty, and I think on aspects of migration as well. But generally, I think we get what we want, and that's because we vote.
I think that's a baffling thesis, that we get what we want. Don't you think so many people listening to this programme today will feel they never get what they want, that they're not listened to, seen or heard, they're overlooked, they're somehow bundled into some other category every time that they really need or want something? People listening are on hospital waiting lists and in actual pain, and they can't sleep, and they don't know when the operation that's going to alleviate the suffering is actually going to take place, and people who just want a humble appointment with their own GP, or to see an actual live dentist somewhere in the vicinity, who hear you say people get what they want and think, hang on, I never get anything I want.
Well, I wasn't meaning to imply that everybody gets what they want all the time.
But does anyone get what they want?
But I'd say on the chief issues of the day, the weight of public opinion does tend to ultimately influence what the government does. And
does it? But does it, or does it influence what the government says rather than what the government does? I mean, there's been an awful lot of signposting in the last. Let's just confine ourselves to the last 6 months. A lot of posturing, a lot of tub thumping, a lot of saying that we're going to stop the small boats, and a whole load of other things. Lots of preferences and public priorities stated without the public having anything to do with it. Members of the public thinking, well, hang on, that's not my priority. I wouldn't have given that list. I don't really want that particularly. And actually, what I do want has been completely ignored or not addressed at all. I'm amazed at what you say, actually.
Well, as I say, there are a number of issues where usually sort of connected around sort of where human rights comes into it, where there is a schism between the political class and what the public as a whole would want. And as I mentioned a few months ago, migration is one of those, which makes it very difficult for who you vote for. But I mean, that's the secret behind the rise of Reform Party, of course, is the issue of migration and the fact that the established parties have a position that's very different from what the public want. So we suddenly have a upstart party that's got 12% of the vote. So there are those issues where there is a difference between political class and other people. But I think generally speaking, where the taxation burden lies, let's take that as an example. I think that we have a share of tax of the economy is around 40% because that's what people want.
I have to say, I am so angry. I mean, this is the most ridiculous, deluded, thick idea ever to come from anybody. I'll just give you a little bit of background.
Please.
I'm not political. I grew up with staunch conservative parents.
Yeah.
I guess I'm a little bit that way because it was drilled into me from a young age. My daughter, on the other hand, is in the middle of A-levels. She's almost 18, extremely political. She studies politics. She's extremely genned up on it all. And to think that a 16 and 17-year-old, most 16 and 17-year-olds in the UK, they don't study it. They probably don't even know who the Shadow Chancellor or whoever is. They have no idea. And how... I mean, most adults haven't got a clue. I don't know much about politics, and I'm 46.
Right.
It's a complete gimmick, and my daughter's trying to sway me to vote Labour because she's very on that side, like most students are. Yeah. And I have to say, that's completely put me right off. I mean, we're in the worst situation in the UK. We're all struggling to pay our bills. We're trying to keep afloat. And to come out with that, I mean, even when my daughter was 16, she wasn't political. It's only since she started A-levels because she studies it. I mean, it's not a GCSE subject, not that I'm aware of.
Well, I don't know where exactly he's spectating from, but he's drawn all sorts of peculiar inferences, is all I can say about that commentator.
Ross Clark, do you mean? Ross Clark from The Spectator? Or what did you think was peculiar?
The fact that bringing in civics classes through the back door and getting an engaged political electorate is no bad thing. The fact that we know that the longer that you are alive, the more the decisions of politicians will affect you. And actually, I don't think we would have seen the closure of youth groups and centres, the selling off of young people provision, quite such an awful state of CAMS and mental health provision for young people if they actually had the vote, because they'd be an electorate that politicians actually had to think about. So that is very interesting. Now, tell me something. If politicians did have to think more carefully about wooing and winning the allegiance of younger voters, how do you think they would change policy? What are the sorts of things that you think we might see that we might not otherwise see? Because actually, that's a very, I think, compelling way of convincing people this might be a good idea, Sal. The way that people are going to try and frame it is a classic bit of conceptual modularity, which is at one point we like to think of children as needing protection from everything, about being vulnerable, and yet also that's only people's individual children, whereas other children who might be wearing hoodies or doing things that parents don't want their own children doing suddenly get framed as these kinds of terrible monsters. We need to stop this, right? The fact is that every person who chooses not to exercise their vote is increasing the power and giving their agency over to those who do. And by engaging with young people, I think that we're actually going to be very surprised at the sorts of questions and decisions that we are forced to make because the young voices in this country are disengaging not just with politics specifically, but with the rest of society in general, because they don't see that there is any buy-in for them. And you're quite right, having said that, most people who then buy a house are part of society and so on have that sort of engagement.